I turned 20 last month. It's a strange age, caught between not quite being a boy and not yet feeling like a man. Everyone tells you it's the beginning of adulthood, but no one prepares you for how heavy that beginning can feel. You carry everything with you, the little moments, the quiet regrets, the things you never said out loud. And sometimes it's one weekend, just a few days, that changes how you see yourself forever. For me, that weekend was at the lake house. It wasn't supposed to be anything special. Just a summer getaway with my best friend Allie and some of her family. But fate, timing, and something I still don't fully understand turned it into the most quietly complicated experience of my life. It was the weekend when I learned how blurred boundaries could feel when you're craving connection. When you're young and lonely and looking for something you can't quite name. I've never told anyone the full story, not even Allie. Especially, not Allie. Maybe it's because it still lives so vividly in my chest. And saying it out loud might make it too real. Or maybe because part of me is still trying to make sense of it. Of him. The way he looked at me like I was something more than just his daughter's quiet friend. The way his presence filled a room without needing to say a word. The way I felt seen. And wanted. Or maybe just imagined I was. All I know is that after that weekend, I was never the same. And no matter how much time passes, that feeling never quite leaves you. Some people say you only fall once. I'm not sure if that's true, but I know exactly when I almost did. The tires crunched against the gravel as I pulled up the long, winding driveway. The trees opened to reveal the lake house, just as I remembered. Timber siding faded to a warm gray, like it had been kissed too long by the sun. A wraparound porch hugged the front, and the lake shimmered just beyond the clearing, quiet and still, like it was holding its breath. I stepped out of the car, squinting up at the house. No other cars. No sound of laughter or movement. I was early. Allie had warned me she and the others wouldn't be arriving until later that evening. I thought I'd enjoy a few hours of solitude. Instead, I found him. Mr. Kingston, King, as most people called him, was standing by the side of the porch, fiddling with a loose hinge on the screen door. He didn't look surprised to see me, just gave a nod like he'd been expecting it. Sunlight hit his profile, outlining the hard lines of his jaw, the streaks of gray in his short, dark beard. He was wearing a plain black t-shirt and jeans, but somehow he made them look deliberate, worn-in strength, effortless confidence. Brantley, right? His voice was deep, smooth, with a hint of a smirk. Allie said you'd probably be the first to show. Yeah, I said, forcing a casual smile. Figured I'd beat traffic. He just nodded again and went back to fixing the hinge. I stood there for a moment, awkwardly shifting my backpack from one shoulder to the other, unsure if I should offer to help or just vanish inside. You can drop your stuff in the guest room at the end of the hall, he added without looking. Up, or hang out on the porch if you want. Won't be much noise around here for a while. The stillness crept in quickly once I was inside. Everything smelled like pine and old wood, with whispers of bonfires past, soaked into the beams. I dropped my bag in the guest room and wandered back outside. King was still on the porch, one boot propped on the railing, arm resting on his knee, his bicep flexed ever so slightly beneath the fabric as he moved. I looked away too quickly. My face felt warm. There was something about the way he carried himself, rooted, grounded, like he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but his presence was heavy, like gravity, pulling you in whether you wanted to be close or not. I sat on the far end of the porch, trying to look at anything but him, but every glance pulled back to his silhouette, the way his chest rose and fell slowly, like even his breathing had authority. I told myself it was admiration, respect for someone older, someone sure of himself. But deep down, I felt the crack of something else, something quieter, something I didn't want to name. Not yet. The sky had shifted to a soft pink haze by the time King offered to grill burgers. I hovered awkwardly by the porch rail while he worked the flames like a man who'd done this 1,000 times. I offered to help, mostly out of politeness, but he waved me off with a quiet grunt and a crooked smile. I've got it. You just sit. So I did. Legs pulled up in a rocking chair, fingers wrapped around a sweating bottle of soda, trying not to stare at the way his forearms flexed when he flipped the patties. He moved deliberately, never rushed. There was something oddly comforting in that. When the food was ready, we ate at the little outdoor table. No music, no distractions, just the sound of cicadas and the distant lapping of the lake against the shore. It should have felt awkward, but it didn't. "You a quiet one, huh?" King said eventually, brushing a hand through his short hair. His eyes landed on me, steady but not sharp. I shrugged, chewing slowly. "Just not big on small talk," he gave a short laugh. "Fair enough. Never saw the point in it myself." A silence fell again, but this time it felt shared, comfortable. We both looked out over the water. Then his voice came low, almost like an afterthought. "So what do you want to do? After school, I mean." I looked at him, surprised. "Like, career-wise?" He nodded. "I'm not sure yet. Maybe writing. Something creative. But sometimes I think I just want to get away. Start over somewhere where no one knows me." He nodded again, like he understood that more than I'd expect. "What about you?" I asked. He smirked, taking a sip from his beer. "I've already done all the starting over I care to." "You mean the divorce?" His expression didn't change, but there was a slight pause before he nodded. "Yeah, that was part of it." There was something heavy in his voice. Not bitterness, exactly. More like resignation. "She and I got married young. Too young. It lasted longer than it should have. But toward the end, I don't think either of us really knew who we were anymore. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I just listened." "You ever been in love?" he asked, suddenly, eyes still on the lake. The question hit me harder than I expected. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've had crushes. I've cared about people. But love?" I hesitated. "Not yet." He finally looked at me. "You date much?" I narrowed my eyes slightly, caught off guard by the shift in his tone. Still casual, but probing. "Not really," I said carefully. He nodded, like he was testing waters. "Because of who you are?" I met his gaze, and something in his eyes told me the question wasn't judgmental. "Just curious?" "You mean because I'm gay?" He didn't flinch. "Yeah." I took a slow breath. "I'm not ashamed of it. I don't advertise it, but I'm not hiding either." King leaned back in his chair, studying me in that quiet way of his. "You don't strike me as someone who hides." I gave a soft laugh. "You'd be surprised." Another pause, this one thicker than before. I watched him, waiting for the next question. But it didn't come. Instead, he looked out toward the trees and spoke again, almost more to himself than me. "People think you get older and figure everything out. Truth is, you just get better at pretending you have." I tilted my head. "Is that what you're doing?" A hint of a smile tugged at his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe." We sat in silence again, but this time it was pulsing, alive with something unspoken. I felt the distance between us shift, bend. Not closed, but narrower than before. "I don't know why I'm telling you all this," he said after a long while. I looked at him and said the first thing that came to mind. "Maybe because I'm listening." He nodded, almost imperceptibly. And in that quiet moment, beneath the pink sky and rising stars, I realized we were both drifting, lonely in our own ways, drawn together by something neither of us could name. Not yet. The others still hadn't arrived. A text from Allie said they'd gotten held up in traffic and wouldn't be there until late, maybe not even tonight. It was just the two of us still. After dinner, I started gathering the dishes, unsure of what else to do with myself. King was leaning back in his chair, a half-finished beer in hand, watching me with that unreadable expression. "You don't have to do all that," he said. "I don't mind." I carried the plates inside, stacking them by the sink. A few minutes later, I heard him come in behind me, his boots soft on the wood floor. The air shifted with his presence. I could feel the warmth of him before I turned around. "You're too polite," he muttered, grabbing a towel and joining me. We didn't say much. The only sounds were the faint hum of insects outside and the splash of water as I rinsed each plate. King dried them and placed them quietly in the cabinet above the counter. At one point, I reached for a glass on the upper shelf, one of the tall ones tucked all the way in the back. I stretched, fingertips just brushing the rim, and then, "Here," he said behind me, his voice low, his arm extended over my shoulder, chest grazing my back, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. His hand closed around the glass easily, pulling it down, but he didn't step back right away. He stood there, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, smell the faint mix of cedar soap and something deeper, something undeniably him. His free hand rested lightly on the edge of the counter, next to mine. Our knuckles brushed. I froze. So did he. Neither of us moved. The air thickened, pulled tight like a string between us. I could feel my heartbeat behind my eyes, in my throat. His arm lingered beside mine. His breath was warm against the side of my face. Our hands touched again, soft, accidental, skin against skin. This time, neither of us pulled away. I turned, just slightly, enough to see his profile. His eyes were already on mine, searching, intense, but not forceful. Like he was waiting for something. Permission? Confirmation? We didn't speak. There was no sound but the slow dripping of water from the faucet and the pounding in my chest. Time stretched, warped. Everything in me lit up, every nerve tuned to this one moment, this one look. Then, slowly, he stepped back. The spell broke. "Sorry," he said, eyes lowering. "Didn't mean to." He stopped short, swallowed, shook, his head slightly. "Nothing happened," he muttered. "Forget it." He walked over to the towel rack and hung up the dishcloth like we hadn't just been suspended in some invisible gravity, like the room hadn't just shifted on its axis. But it had. I stood at the sink, fingers still tingling where his had touched mine. Nothing happened, he'd said. But that wasn't true. Something had happened. And whatever it was still hanging. In the air between us, thick, charged, impossible to ignore. It started to rain just after sunset, slow at first, then relentless, drumming steady against the roof of the lake house. The storm hadn't been in the forecast, but it didn't seem to care. The wind pushed water against the windows in sheets, turning the world outside into a hazy blur. "Guess they're really not making it tonight," I said, peeking at my phone. "Nope," King said simply from where he stood at the sliding glass doors, looking out at the downpour. "Allie just texted. They're waiting it out at some roadside diner. Just us again." I pulled the thick plaid blanket from the back of the couch and wrapped it around my shoulders, settling into the cushions. The cabin felt cozy in the storm. Warm yellow light, the scent of old wood and clean linen. Safe, in a way that made me feel oddly exposed. "You cold?" King asked, glancing at me. I nodded. "A little." He disappeared into the hallway and came back with a folded throw. "Here," he said, offering it without fanfare. He hesitated, then sank onto the couch, leaving space between us. We ended up watching something, an old movie I barely followed. The kind of thing that played softly in the background of your thoughts when your focus was somewhere else. Like, on the man sitting 2 feet away, shifting occasionally, his fingers tapping softly against the armrest. He didn't look like someone who fidgeted often, but tonight, he seemed unsettled. His jaw clenched when a romantic scene came on. 2 characters, tangled in an emotional argument that ended in a kiss. King cleared his throat. "Do you like it?" I asked, voice low. He shrugged. "It's all right. Kinda quiet. That's what I like about it." A pause. He turned to me. "You always this quiet?" I smiled, pulling the blanket tighter around me. "Most people think I am. What do you think?" I looked at him for a second. "I think I feel loud in my own head most of the time. Just too much of everything." He nodded slowly, like he understood that more than he expected to. "Used to feel that way," he said after a moment. "When I was younger, like there was too much going on inside, and I didn't know where to put it." The rain was steady now, rhythmic and almost soothing. "What changed?" I asked. He exhaled, a long breath that seemed to carry years in it. I got good at pretending, he said. You pretend long enough, and it becomes easier than figuring out what's real. His voice was softer now. Not quite broken, but close. I've been alone for a long time, he added. Sometimes I forget what it's like to sit with someone and just be. That space between us had narrowed. He was closer now. Not touching, but the warmth of him radiated through the inch or two of air between our arms. His hand rested near mine on the cushion, fingers barely curled. He looked down at them, then up at me, like he was about to say something. His mouth opened slightly, but he stopped himself. I watched his throat move as he swallowed hard. King, I said quietly before I could stop myself. He looked at me. You don't have to be alone. His eyes flicked to mine, uncertain, vulnerable, like I'd reached into something raw. I didn't say more. I didn't have to. He nodded, barely, but it was there. That silent acknowledgement. That he heard me. That maybe, just maybe, it mattered. And we sat like that, listening to the rain, the movie forgotten, wrapped in blankets, in silence. Together. The storm had passed, but the quiet it left behind was even heavier than the rain. It was late, too late to still be up, but neither of us had moved from the couch. The movie had ended long ago, replaced by the soft hum of the old fridge and the ticking of the wall clock. The room was lit only by a lamp on the end table, casting everything in a soft golden glow. King had shifted back a little, but he hadn't gone far. We sat close, closer than before, our legs just barely touching, and neither of us flinched from the contact. I felt his warmth again, that grounded, solid presence. And maybe it was the stillness of the night, or maybe the way he hadn't looked at me the same since the rain started. But I found myself leaning slowly, almost cautiously, until my head rested gently on his shoulder. He didn't move. He didn't say a word. He just stayed still, letting me be there. I could feel the rise and fall of his chest, the quiet tension in his muscles. And then, I felt it, his hand brushing against mine. Not by accident this time. Intentional. Careful. His fingers grazed my skin and stayed there, his thumb resting lightly along the side of my hand. A small touch, but it lit something inside me, something that had been flickering for days. I turned my head slightly, looked up. He looked down at the same time. Our eyes met. The air between us grew dense, thick with something I couldn't name, but didn't want to escape. I watched his gaze flicker to my mouth, just for a second. His breathing slowed. Mine did too. I leaned forward barely, just enough to close the space. So did he. We were inches apart now. I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his lips parted, like he was preparing for something he didn't quite believe he was doing. And then, he pulled away. Quick, sharp, like the moment had burned him. He stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair, his back turned to me. "This isn't right," he said, voice rough. I didn't move. I just sat there, blinking back the sting of embarrassment. "You're my daughter's friend," he added, quieter now. I can't. I could barely hear over the pounding in my chest, but I nodded slowly. I understood what he was saying, and what he wasn't. Still, I found my voice. But it felt right, I said softly. He turned just slightly, like he was going to say something else, but he didn't. He just looked at me, eyes shadowed with something that felt like regret. Then he walked down the hall and disappeared into his room. The door closed behind him. I was alone in the soft light and silence, with nothing but the memory of a moment that had almost been, and still lingered in the air like a secret. The early morning light filtered in through the thin curtains, casting a muted glow across the room. I woke up slowly, the remnants of sleep still clinging to my thoughts, but a quiet sense of clarity was already taking shape in the back of my mind. The house was still, too still. and then I heard the sound of something outside. Wood splitting. A rhythmic thud and the low hum of King's voice, though I couldn't hear the words. It was early enough for the world to still feel untouched, like we hadn't crossed any lines that couldn't be undone. I dressed quietly, trying to ignore the thudding in my chest. When I stepped outside, the cold morning air hit me sharply, and there he was, King, chopping wood in the small yard. His movements were deliberate, powerful, each strike of the axe meeting the logs with a solid, satisfying crack. He didn't notice me at first, his focus on the task in front of him. But when I stepped closer, he paused, looking over his shoulder. His eyes met mine, calm, steady, like nothing had happened between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel the space between us, thick with the unspoken, with everything we hadn't said. I shifted my weight, hands in my pockets, unsure of how to begin, unsure if words could change anything. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand, then took a slow step toward me. His eyes were soft, but his expression was unreadable. "Morning," he said simply, like we hadn't been standing on the edge of something dangerous the night before. "Morning," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "How long have you been up?" "Not long, just needed some air." There was a quiet pause. Then, unexpectedly, King looked at me. Not with the same guarded distance he usually wore, but with something deeper, something that felt almost respectful. "You're brave," he said, his voice low. "Don't lose that." I blinked, surprised by the weight of his words. There was a sincerity there, something that made my chest tighten with emotion I didn't know how to express. He didn't say anything else, didn't try to make it better. He just let the silence sit between us, heavy and full. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, afraid that if I said anything, I might lose the delicate balance of the moment. He turned back toward the woodpile, his back to me now, but I could feel his presence just as strongly. I stood there for a moment longer, watching him as he began chopping again, the steady rhythm of the axe breaking the silence. And then, without another word, I turned and walked back toward the cabin, the weight of everything that had passed between us pressing down on me. By the time I reached the door, I could hear the soft crunch of his boots in the gravel, fading into the distance. I didn't look back. We parted without words. But somehow, everything had already changed. I've thought about that weekend many times since, each memory wrapped in a soft, bittersweet glow. I still don't know what it was about that place. The isolation of the lake house, the quiet spaces between words, that made everything feel so raw. But I've come to understand something about myself in the years that have passed. I never told Allie what happened. It felt like a secret that was too heavy for her to carry. Something she wouldn't understand. Maybe it's better that way. She didn't need to know the quiet, complicated emotions I'd left behind there, tangled in the space between King and me. She never asked, and I never offered. Some things are meant to be kept silent, even if they burn in your chest for years. I think about King from time to time, not with regret, never with regret, but with a warmth that surprises me, a warmth that makes me smile even now. He was never what I expected, not the way I imagined a man like him would be. He was strength, sure, but also a quiet vulnerability that no one saw. A man of layers, like everyone else. That weekend showed me who I was, in ways I hadn't known I needed to see. It revealed my capacity for connection, for the kind of love that doesn't need to be defined or labeled. And more than anything, it gave me courage. Courage to face the things I'd been running from. For myself. For my future. I've grown since then. I've learned to embrace the parts of me that I used to hide. The parts that once felt like too much to give away. I've learned to value the quiet moments, the ones that don't demand anything from you but simply exist. I'm different now, and I'm okay with that. Whatever that weekend meant, whatever it was between King and me, it was the moment I needed to truly see myself. I think maybe that's the kind of love that sticks with you. The kind that doesn't need to be spoken. It just stays, soft and steady, like the warm sun on a cold day.